name is Isaac Reichman. I'm the Director of Public Information at the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First, a big portion of today's webinar will be to answer questions that you have. Please use the chat if you have any questions. I'm typing into that right now. Please send your questions via the chat. That's the easiest way for me to kind of track questions as they're coming in. There'll be time for me to answer all questions that come in at the end of this webinar. So if you ask a question at the beginning, I promise I'm not ignoring you. It just might be either answered over the course of the webinar, or I will have time at the end to answer those questions. You'll notice at the bottom of every single page, there is an email address. That's bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Please use that email address if you have any questions that either we don't get to today, or perhaps I need to check with some colleagues, or I need to look up the answer for, or perhaps if you have a very specific question that requires us to look into the kind of specific instances, please send those questions via email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. You can also use that email if you have any questions related to city regulation, licensing, things like that, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you have something that you missed and want to come back and check later, or if you have a colleague that was unable to join, or if you want to share it out, the webinar will be posted on our YouTube page. That's youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. All of our webinars we've ever had, just about all of them are posted on that website. Additionally, you will be able to find it hopefully by tomorrow on our business education page. It's the same page you used to get to today's webinar. That's chicago.gov/business education. Great, so without further ado, I will get started. We have a lot of content to cover, but we will be we'll be going through relatively quickly. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out. So today's webinar is, again, on the state-imposed Tier 1 resurgence mitigations for bars and restaurants. So specifically, I'm going to talk about all the different, the new Tier 1 mitigation measures, what they mean specifically for bars and restaurants. I'm going to start by giving an overview of the state mitigation plan in general, kind of where we are exactly. I know there's a lot of different tiers and phases and numbers thrown around. So I'm going to provide a quick overview of the state's plan. And then I'm going to talk about the metrics, why Chicago was able to get to Tier 1. I'm going to talk about the details of this program, so of this Tier 1 mitigation level. So everything related to all different industries under Tier 1. Then I'm going to go into detail specifically on bar and restaurant mitigations. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the criteria to move forward or backward in mitigations. These are things directly set by the state. So I can't kind of speak too much to why the state set these exact metrics or these exact mitigation measures. But I will tell you what the state has communicated on how we will move forward, or how, God forbid, we would have to move backwards. All of this information, and I'll type it into the chat as well, can be found on chicago.gov/reopening. That's the city's reopening webpage. I recommend everybody visit that closely, because there, as I'll talk about today, there are a couple places where the city is stricter than the state's regulations. So for the most part, our regulations match the state's, but there are a couple instances in which ours are stricter than the state. We can't be less strict, but we can be stricter. And there's a couple instances in which that is the case. And that's because, you know, we rely on our own local health department here. And obviously the case, the situation in Chicago is different than it is in other places around the state. So there are a couple items, a couple places where we are stricter than the state. I'll point those out on today's webinar, but I recommend that you visit chicago.gov/reopening for the specific regulations here in Chicago. So a little bit of an overview of the entire state-imposed mitigation measures. So I'm sure you've heard phase 4, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, phase 5, all these different things. This visual kind of shows you where we are at. Back in September, when we were, had the virus really under control in Chicago and under 5% test positivity rate, we were in phase 4. As the cases started to rise and as we had really the second surge in Chicago, throughout Illinois, really throughout the entire Midwest and most of the country, the state started by adding Tier 1 mitigation measures. Then, as it kept getting worse, they added Tier 2, and finally they added Tier 3 in the end of November. That's when they shut down, indoor dining was already banned at that point, shut down performance venues, museums, indoor recreation, places like that. Now that the case rate is getting better and better, hospitalizations are getting better and better, and we have sufficient capacity in our hospitals, the state has started to roll back those mitigation measures. About a week and a half ago, we went to Tier 2, and then just this past weekend on Saturday, we went to Tier 1, and that is where we are at right now. And if we continue to progress, we will even remove the Tier 1 mitigation measures and get into phase 4. We're not at that point yet, and I'll talk a little bit later about what exactly it would take for us to get to phase 4. Put another website in here, and I'll type it into the chat as well if you want to copy and paste. That's dph.illinois.gov/region metrics. Again, dph.illinois.gov/region metrics. This is a website that I check every day. I update it. I refresh regularly throughout the day. This is where the state posts all their metrics for every different region around the state and how close we are and what different mitigations different regions are in. Chicago is region 11, and I recommend checking it. They usually update the metrics about the middle of the day each day, around 11 or noon every day. I recommend that people bookmark that page if you want to stay very much aware of what's going on with COVID, specifically as the state is looking at it, because they're the ones that are determining when we move between tiers and phases. So why are we here? I do want to talk about the metrics. I'm not the health department, I'm not the state, I'm not the city's health department, but I do want to make sure folks know why we're at Tier 1, what it would take to move to phase 4, or to potentially even move back to Tier 2. So the Chicago region, region 11, met the state imposed criteria this past Saturday, January 23rd, to move to Tier 1 mitigation measures. That happened because that was the day where we first met all 3 of these criteria. That's first, test positivity rate below 8% for 3 consecutive days. It's actually gotten even better since Saturday. We're now at 7.1%. Greater than 20% available staffed ICU beds for 3 consecutive days on a 7-day rolling average. We've actually been doing really good on that for quite a while now. We're way above 20%. We currently have 27% of our ICU beds available. Then finally, no sustained increase in the number of people in the hospital with COVID-19. And we've actually been seeing that number also consistently going down. Still way higher than it was back in the summer and fall, but it's been going down consistently. And today we've just broke 700 and we're at 697. Now, Chicago and other regions as well were able to move to Tier 2 and then into Tier 1 because the state removed one of their requirements. Up until just a couple weeks ago, there was a requirement to have greater than 20% available staffed medical and surgical hospital beds. We've long been pushing the state that metric isn't really accurate for a city of Chicago's size and doesn't accurately reflect our real hospital capacity. So we were very pleased to see that they removed that requirement, which allowed us to move forward into Tier 2 and then into Tier 1 just this past weekend. So what does Tier 1 mean? I'm sure you guys all know by now, and there's a lot more details you're here for other than just what you see on this page. First, as you know, indoor dining can now resume at 25% capacity or 25 people with no more than 4 people per table. Don't worry, I'm going to go into a lot more detail on what this means. Events can also resume at 25% capacity or 25 people, and fitness classes can resume at 15 people maximum. So before going into the bars and restaurants in a lot of detail, I do want to take a minute to make sure everybody is aware of all the different industry guidelines that are in place now that we're in Tier 1. So you can see on this chart, on the right side of this chart is Tier 1 capacity, what is in place right now. In the middle is Tier 2 capacity, what we just moved from last week. First, commercial and residential buildings and hotels can operate at 40% capacity or 50 people per space. That means in common areas, checkout areas, things like that. Events at any of these establishments, events anywhere, are limited to 25% or 25 people. Indoor recreation, I know some folks are on that have indoor recreation facilities. They can operate at 40% capacity or 50 people. That includes bowling alleys, arcades, places like that. Museums are up to 40% capacity or 50 people. Personal services, there's actually no change for personal services. The big change going into Tier 2 was that services that require the removal of face coverings, such as beard shaves or facials, were now allowed. Retail stores are still operating at 40%. Grocery stores and pharmacies can operate at 50%. Performance venues and movie theaters, 40% or 50 people per space. Events, indoor and outdoor events, again, whether indoor or outdoor, such as weddings, potlucks, anything like that, are capped at 25% capacity or 25 people. Food and drink, and I'll go into this in more detail, food and drink can be served at events, but they need to follow the indoor dining guidelines, the same guidelines that are followed for restaurants and bars. Great, so for restaurants and bars, again, I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail on the next slide. Indoor service can resume at 25% capacity or 25 people. Importantly, though, outdoor service can continue under the existing regulations. That does not count towards your 25% or 25 people capacity. Indoors, tables are limited to no more than 4 people. Outdoors, tables are limited to no more than 6 people. Childcare and out-of-school programs have no change, really, even as we went into Tier 2 and Tier 3. Health and fitness centers are operating at 40% indoor capacity, with group classes resuming at 40% capacity or 15 people per space. And outdoor classes are limited to 50 people with social distancing. Reservations are not required, and locker rooms can open under capacity restrictions. So most of this webinar is going to be focusing obviously on bar and restaurants. I see a couple questions come in. I'll promise I'll get to those. Indoor service is permitted at bars and restaurants now as of this past Saturday. Lesser of 25 people or 25% capacity, and 4 people per indoor table. Again, those are the real high level. Hopefully everyone has those numbers down. Food must be available at all times. Again, food must be available at all times. That means that if you are a bar, a tavern, a brewery, someplace like that that does not have a food license, you need to make sure that you either partner with a local restaurant or with a third-party delivery service so that food is available. So it can be really, really simple. This is not intended to be a very heavy lift for taverns. Just need to make sure that food is available. That can be as simple as putting a sign up in your establishment that says, hey, order from Grubhub. Here's the address, and Grubhub will deliver here. Or there's a pizza place next door, and you can bring that pizza in from that place. So it's not expected to be a formal written partnership, anything like that. However, you are expected to make sure that your customers are aware that food is available and how to get it. It's not sufficient for you to just, as the owner or as the bartender or waiter or waitstaff, know that food is available. You are required to make it known to your customers. It can be a very simple sign posted. It can be a little, pop-up thing saying, hey, when you check out your menu, hey, you can order food from this place as well. The important thing is that food's available at all times. So if our investigators show up and they ask where, is food available, you should know where that's available, and you should have signage indicating how and where it's available from. No sitting, ordering, or congregating at the bar. This is something that's formally in place coming from the state. This is not something that we have any control over. No sitting, ordering, or congregating at the bar. The state recommends that you remove your bar stools. That's not a formal requirement. That's not something our investigators are going to be looking for, but no sitting, ordering, or congregating at bars at this time. Fully enclosed tents are allowed. You can have a fully enclosed outdoor tent. However, that is now considered indoors. So 4 people per table, 25 people, 25% capacity. So fully enclosed tents, they were not allowed under Tier 2 and Tier 3. Now they are allowed, and they're considered indoors. One thing I do want to make sure to emphasize, and I'm going to get into a lot more detail on the next slide as well, outdoor service is still allowed under existing regulations. So many of you have outdoor service that you've been doing. That can continue, and that does not count towards your indoor service capacity. This includes sidewalk cafes, which existing sidewalk cafes have been extended to May 1st. So you do not need to worry about extending and renewing your sidewalk cafe right now. Outdoor patios, and their new program we made during COVID, expanded outdoor dining. Rooms, tables on rooftops and underneath retractable roofs are considered outdoors. One quick point on retractable roofs. If your establishment has a retractable roof, then for a table to be considered outdoors, it needs to be directly underneath that retractable roof, that open roof. It's not enough to have a small portion of your roof open and then have a table that's in the opposite side of the room. That's not considered outdoors. It needs to be directly underneath that retractable roof. Outdoor tents are considered outdoors if they have at least 50% of their sides open. A fully enclosed tent is considered indoors. Igloos and other one-party enclosures, those are allowed and are considered outdoors. They need to have a little bit of ventilation, just like a small window open or some sort of opening to allow some sort of ventilation. And they need to just have one party within them. You cannot have multiple parties within them. Indoor, and I want to emphasize this, indoor spaces that are within 8 feet of walls that are at least 50% open are still considered outdoors. So I know many establishments during Tier 2 and Tier 3 had tables that were within 8 feet of walls that are at least 50% open. That is, if you do that, that is still considered outdoors. And therefore, those people don't count towards your indoor capacity. So if you have these tables that are within open walls and windows, that does not count towards your 25% or 25 people capacity indoors. Those tables are considered outdoors. Obviously, the windows need to be open. This should go without saying. You can't just have people sitting near the windows and then, oh, it's cold today, I'm going to shut those windows. Now it's indoors. Outdoor tables, 6 people per table outdoors. 4 people per table indoors, 6 people per table outdoors. Want to remind everybody of these rules. It's been a while since we've had indoor dining. Face coverings must be worn at all indoor and outdoor public settings, except when seated and actively eating or drinking. So again, if you are actively eating or drinking, that's the only time you can remove face coverings. Face coverings need to be put on whenever servers come by, while you're ordering, anytime you're not actively eating or drinking. Tables must be 6 feet apart, indoors or outdoors. Patrons must be seated while eating or drinking. This is very important and one of the main things that our investigators find and cite businesses for. Patrons must be seated while eating or drinking. You can't simply, you can't have people mingling while they're eating or drinking. Recreation, if your bar or restaurant has pool, has darts, has arcade games, things like that are allowed, but you can't be eating or drinking while playing them. So you must be seated whenever eating or drinking. Reservations are required at this point. That's something formal from the state. Additionally, from the state, there's a 2-hour time limit for indoor seating. Finally, and again, this is something that is directly part of the Tier 1 mitigations from the state, on-site dining or drinking must end at 11 p.m. This doesn't mean last call is 11 p.m. This doesn't mean you order at 10:50 and then you finish your drink and are out by 11:30. This means all patrons on-site patrons must leave and be off premises by 11 p.m. Delivery and pickup of alcohol must also end at 11 p.m. That means if you're delivering alcohol, it must be actually delivered, not at 11 p.m., not out for delivery at 11. Pickup or delivery of food can continue after 11 p.m. for any of the hours that you're licensed to operate. So the only patrons that can be on site then after 11 p.m. are patrons that are picking up food for delivery or for delivery or carry out. We recommend that every business, keep a log of who your employees are. We sometimes show up to a packed establishment at 1 a.m. and people say, oh, they're all employees. We're not going to believe that if it looks like there's many people that are still there. Have some sort of proof to us that they're employees. Have some sort of log, some sort of written thing saying that people are employees. Now I'm going to take a minute to open up for questions. On the next slide, I'm going to get a little bit more into events and other establishments that aren't specifically bars and restaurants and their rules for food. But for now, I'm going to open up to questions specifically for bars and restaurants. Here's a great question. Can the same group have 2 tables of 4? Yes, at this point, there aren't restrictions explicitly on group size, provided that tables have no more than 4 indoors and no more than 6 outdoors. So you can have a group with 2 tables of 4, but they must obviously be 6 feet apart, and it's your responsibility to stop them from pushing tables closer to each other or from mingling. If you don't think you can prevent that, then it's your responsibility as the operator to not seat them. If you don't think, if we show up and there's 2 tables of 4 that are pushed together and there's 8 people sitting around, then that is a violation. Great question, and there's a couple questions that have come in related to this about a restaurant that has different rooms or and maybe different enclosed tents. So this 25% or 25 people capacity is per room or space. So if you have entirely different rooms, or you have multiple different fully enclosed tents that are really separate from each other, each one can have 25 people or 25% capacity. Now, there isn't formal definitive guidance explicitly kind of one size fits all on what constitutes a different room. If you want to share your floor plan and check with us on that, then we can tell you what exactly. We'd have to kind of look at specifics to determine whether or not it is a different space. But the formal guidance, the general guidelines we provide are if they're separate rooms that people are not intermingling with and have some sort of divider between them, be it a door, even if the door is open most of the time, as long as there's some sort of dividing and some sort of division between that space, then it counts as different rooms. And you can have 25 people or 25% capacity in each one of those. I got a question here. Do employees count in any of the capacity areas? Employees do not count towards your capacity. I had a question. If somebody has a tavern license and does not have a retail food license, and there's no restaurant near them to partner with, what can they do? We're really flexible with this. Saying that people can get delivery from Grubhub or DoorDash or Uber Eats or one of those companies will suffice. It doesn't need to be a physical restaurant that you're partnering with. Simply saying, order through Grubhub, here's the address to give Grubhub, and you can bring in that food and eat it here. That will suffice. It doesn't need to be a formal partnership with a brick and mortar restaurant. Now, we encourage you to partner with your local restaurants if you have them, so we can all support our local businesses, but it does not need to be a formal partnership with a brick and mortar restaurant. Great. Are reservations required? That was answered. Yes, reservations are required. I'm seeing a couple questions come in about indoor recreation and performance venues and places like that. And so I'm going to pop into that question on the next slide. So other food and drink establishments. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking on this and answering the questions that came in related to this. First, and this is bolded, and I want to repeat over and over again, patrons must be seated at all times when eating or drinking, no matter the industry. If you're having a wedding, if you're at a performance venue, a movie theater, an indoor recreation facility, anything that is food or drink, patrons must be seated. So indoor recreation, again, that's bowling, that's arcades, things like that. Performance venues and movie theaters, they can all operate at the lesser of 40% capacity or 50 people. Food can be served and consumed at these establishments. If the food is consumed at tables where patrons are facing each other and or being served by an employee where their employee will actually bring the food out to someone, that qualifies you as a bar or restaurant. If there's any sort of table service, if the food is consumed at tables, then that makes you a bar or restaurant, and you need to follow the 25% or 25 people capacity with no more than 4 people per table. If you do not have that, if you serve food but it's not consumed at tables, it's consumed by patrons at their seat, and they order at a counter and bring it themselves to a seat, then you can operate at 40% or 50 people with no more than 6 people per group. I know it's a little bit of a weird distinction, but we checked with the state on this, and their interpretation and their explanation is that if you're at a movie theater, for example, and you're all sitting in seats and not facing each other, there's different guidelines than if you're sitting at a restaurant table facing each other. So if you're a performance venue, if you're an indoor recreation facility, and people order at a counter and bring to their seat, you can operate at 40% capacity, no more than 50 people with no more than 6 people per group. If you are a performance venue, though, and people sit around tables and you have wait staff bringing people food, then you need to operate at 25% capacity or no more than 25 people. So if it looks like a bar or a restaurant, then it must follow the rules of a bar or restaurant. Regardless, bar seating is not allowed at any of these establishments. And again, it's bolded on top. Patrons must be seated at all times when eating or drinking, no matter what. Finally, events are allowed. You can have private events, and they can operate at 25% capacity or 25 people. However, you must follow those indoor dining guidelines for bars and restaurants. So if you have, if you want to rent out your bar for a private event, that's fine. You can do that. You must follow 25% capacity or 25 people. You must have no more than 4 people per table. You must have food available at all times. You must close at 11 p.m. And patrons must be seated while eating or drinking. The only benefit of a private event is that you're not limited by the 2-hour reservation limit on indoor dining. So you're not limited by that 2-hour limit if you have a private event. But all the other regulations do need to be followed if you have a private event. All right, I did see a lot of questions come in related to this. I think I answered a lot of them, but I'm going to do my best I'm going to scroll through the questions and see if we missed any of them. Great. I got a question about dining considered separate space than an arcade space or a bowling area. Again, it depends on your exact setup. If the dining area is really within the same room as the bowling area, then you should really treat that all as entirely as one space under the, whatever capacity restrictions apply. But if they're separate rooms, then you can treat them separately under whatever industry they fall into. Great. For indoor recreation, how many people per group size? If you're serving food, you're limited to 6 people. Unfortunately, today was mostly about the food service and bars. Please send us an email to BACP Outreach, and I can provide you more information on the limit for group size if food is not being provided. I don't know that off the top of my head. Great. Additionally, indoor playgrounds. I believe indoor playgrounds are meant to remain closed at this time. But please send me an email and I can provide additional clarification there. Great. had a question, and this was sent earlier. We have a PPA, public place of amusement license, and we are a performance venue as well as a tavern and food license. So you can operate at 40% capacity if you are operating as a performance venue and you do not have patrons that are sitting at tables and eating. So if you're sitting around at tables and facing each other and eating, then you should be operating at the 25% or 25 capacity, whether eating or drinking. But if you're really just a performance venue and you either don't serve food or people are sitting in seats eating the food and they go up to a counter, then you can operate at 40% capacity. Right? Buffets and self-service buffets and self-service beverage stations can be open as long as an attendant is serving the food and beverage. So people cannot be serving themselves. If you have an employee serving the food, then you can they can be open. Again, the food must be seated must be eaten while sitting down. Again, I saw another question: how big can groups be for indoor recreation without food? That's something, unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look up. Please send us an email to BACP Outreach, and I will follow up with that one. Right. Scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Right. Great, so I'm going to take a couple minutes, and again, I will stick around for additional questions as they come in. I'm going to take a couple minutes to talk about what might be coming next. So for us to move forward into phase 4 mitigations, we must meet the following criteria. Test positivity rate less than or equal to 6.5% for 3 consecutive days. We're currently, as of today, at 7.1%. So that means that 3 consecutive days has not started under less than or equal to 6.5%. If tomorrow we're at 6.0%, that would start the clock, which means by Friday we can move to phase 4. Obviously, we're still 0.6% above the threshold, so I'm not the health department, and I will not make any assumptions about what the health metrics will look like in the next few days. But we are still above that threshold. I recommend folks follow it closely. The other 2 metrics are those same 2 metrics that we continue to track, and we're still doing well on both of those. Again, I recommend you check out the Illinois Department of Public Health's website. Here's our graph of positivity rate. As you can see, it's been going down consistently. Our goal is to get below that 6.5% threshold for 3 consecutive days. ICU beds, we've been pretty consistently in the high 20% for a while, which is great, but hopefully that will continue. Finally, hospitalizations have been going down consistently, and we really do hope that that remains the same. Obviously, this is the good sign that we're moving in the right direction. However, the state has set very clear guidelines for what it would take for us to move backwards to Tier 2. We really, truly hope, we know this has been such a tough time, we really hope that this doesn't happen, which is why it's so important that we move carefully and cautiously into Tier 1 with this limited amount of indoor dining and with still limited capacity across industries. Because the last thing we want right now is for cases to spike. So for us to have to move backwards into Tier 2, we would need to have our positivity rate raised to above 8% and below 13% for 3 consecutive days. And sorry, I forgot to update this number. It's currently 7.1% today. We do, however, have a 14-day monitoring period under Tier 1 mitigation. So we entered on January 23rd. So we would not move back to Tier 2 until February 6th, if I'm doing my quick math in my head. February 6th is the earliest we can move back. We really hope that that doesn't happen. So we really call on everybody to continue doing a great job. And we were out enforcing this weekend, and we just about every single place we went to is doing a really good job following the rules. So thank you all. Just by joining this webinar, that's a sign that you're interested in following these capacity rules. Our focus is going to be on sharing information as much as we can and not being punitive unless we find really egregious violations. but 25% capacity, 25 people, no more than 4 people per table. Thank you all for all your work following these regulations. I'll stick around for a couple additional questions. If there's something I didn't answer or something I directed you, please email bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Great. Dance floors, are they open for events? At this point, dance floors are not open. Anything like that for which you cannot social distance are not open at this time. If restaurants have communal tables, can plexiglass be used to break up the table? This is something that's really been in place and allowed throughout. If you have tables that are either maybe stuck at 3 feet apart instead of 6 feet apart, or you have a communal table, you can put up an impermeable barrier. It does need to be big enough to stop any sort of transfer of droplets between people, but you can use plexiglass, some sort of impermeable barrier like that, to either break up a table or to go between tables that cannot move and are within 6 feet of each other. Great. Got a couple questions about what phase 4 exactly will look like. That's something that's still kind of under conversation on the local level. So I'm not fully aware of exactly what it will look like. I promise as soon as we know a little more information, we will share it with everybody. Great question about musicians. Live musicians are allowed at this point. They must be at least 10 feet away from guests. With performance venues allowed to reopen, that means also performances within bars or restaurants are allowed as long as they're 10 feet away from guests. Got a question, can we post restaurant violations when you inspect and are they in compliance? So we're happy to share that. We make pretty public each week. It's not something that we formally post on our website at this point, just because a lot of times there are establishments that have relatively minor violations. That is something though that we do share with press regularly, and you're also welcome to reach out to us, and I'm happy to share some of that information. Great. Well, again, I'll stick around for another couple minutes. We're ending a little bit early. This webinar, again, will be posted soon. And anything that was not answered or any follow-ups, please don't hesitate to reach out via email. Thank you all.